Hello everybody! Today I would like to share with you a review of a book, The Flight of the Firebird by Kenneth Johnson, and I have both the paperback and the hardback. This was sent to me by the publisher, the Crow Books, which I am very grateful for. It's awesome to have an opportunity to review books like this, especially because of you, my audience, who are vastly interested in potential book recommendations on the topics of Slavic magic, paganism, witchcraft, and all of the adjacent topics, right? So today we are going to be taking a really deep dive into this book and taking a close look at the contents in order to establish whether the book is worth recommending or not. So first I would like to kind of walk you through the structure of the book, what it looks like, what you can find in the chapters, and then I will move on to share my opinion with you. So let's go. Alright, so here's what the paperback and the hardback look like side by side. I would like to first read to you a description of the book from the publisher's page so that you can kind of know what the premise of the book is about. I'm going to be just reading from my phone. Flight of the Firebird, Slavic Magical Wisdom and Lore by Kenneth Johnson is an incredible guide into the folk magical traditions of the Slavic peoples, documenting his time spent studying with the magical practitioners abroad. Flight of the Firebird offers a unique perspective into the magical practices of an incredibly beautiful culture. The book is filled with the author's real-world experiences alongside the wisdom and teachings of the Slavic magical elders to create a highly engaging and quite operative book of magic and folklore. Now let's look at the contents, okay? So you get, I think, 13 chapters. Each of the chapters kind of tackles a different kind of teaching, different aspect of Slavic magic. Some of the chapters are more focused on theory, like talking about the theory of how the cosmos is built according to Slavic mythology, what are some of the gods. Then some other chapters are about modes of practicing magic. Like for example, there's a few chapters titled Earth Magic, Magic of Trees. Here's another Earth Magic chapter. So basically those chapters are focusing on the teachings of one specific guy, Vladimir. Then other chapters kind of include some bits and pieces of the things that the author experienced with a couple other practitioners. The book, the way it's structured, it's supposed to be kind of the way I can compare it, I would say. What came to mind for me anyway was, I know maybe this is funny, but Carlos Castaneda with his series of books where it reads, you're not sure if it's fiction or if it's a kind of documentary style book, you know what I mean? So this one is also written in this style where he not only shares the things that he learned from the practitioners, but it's kind of written in a narrative style where some chapters he describes exactly what they were doing, what they were talking about, kind of like an adventure style. So in that way, the book is super easy to read, and I read it in, I think, 2 days or maybe 2.5, something like that. So it's a fairly quick read. Now, let's just quickly look at the insights further, because other than the table of contents, of course, I just wanted to show you some of the insides. Like there's beautiful illustrations across the book, and the production quality in general, I think, is great. So you have some illustrations like this. very atmospheric, I would say. So I love that for sure. Here's another one. So other than the chapters, at the end, you also get a glossary. In here, you have mostly some of the beings that he talks about described in the way that he understands them, or I don't know, the knowledge that he managed to gain on each of them. So if somebody who's reading this and is not familiar with the Slavic culture, the Slavic demons and deities, then they can always look at the back and kind of, you know, get some more context, reference, etc. So now that we kind of know what the book looks like, how it's structured, what the style is like, I would like to move on to talking about my personal opinions. And I need to stress this. These are my personal opinions based on my knowledge and experience of the Slavic culture, of the Slavic folk magic, of being a practitioner and being somebody who lives and breathes this culture. I live in Poland, as you know. This is not something that's distant from me. This is something that I grew up with, okay? So I want you to keep that in mind. And I want you to keep in mind that these are all my opinions, and you are entitled to disregard them, ignore them, or disagree with me and have a conversation. Yeah, so let's get back on the couch, so it's kind of more casual style chatting with you, hopefully. I have a lot to talk about. Some of my opinions may be strong, I admit, because this book made me feel a lot of things, and I want to talk about them because I feel like it's important. But first things first, the book, which I should be holding somewhere here for reference for you, right? It's actually, and you learn this from the foreword, which is written by Madame Pamita, that this book was published in the past under a different title, Slavic Sorcery, which you can of course Google, check out, see former reviews, etc. So I'm not sure if this version is in any way updated, if anything has been changed. I only spotted like one paragraph where he was mentioning something about, you know, that back when he was in Russia, which was in the 90s, things were a bit different than they are now. So I feel like that was an added opinion or something in the book. But other than that, I'm not sure how much of this was revised and kind of checked out for inconsistencies or errors, or updated with new knowledge that we have available today. Because it has to be stated that, you know, back in the 90s, there was much less known about some of those things that we know now, especially in the English language, right? So generally the premise of the book is that Kenneth decided one day that he's interested in learning about Slavic magic, so he packed his bags and he flew to Russia in order to learn from actual practitioners, to kind of get to know this tradition, get to know their teachings, learn what it is about, etc. Now, here's where the problem kind of comes in. I feel like Kenneth, as a person, was not prepared in any way for this adventure. He admits that he knew zero Russian language. He doesn't state anywhere if he has any background anywhere with like Slavic ancestry, or, you know, some family or any ties basically that would make him particularly interested in the topic. What I gathered from what was shared is basically that barely anybody knows barely anything about this, so I'm gonna pick it up so that I can write about it to tell people more. But I think maybe he didn't take into consideration, and yeah, back in the 90s, sure, I would maybe, probably, I don't know, maybe I would approach it the same way he did. But it seems like he thought that no Slavic people would read this book ever and like be able to verify what he shared and criticize it and compare it with their actual lived experiences and their knowledge of their own living culture. And I have to admit, at some points in the book, I found myself really wanting to ask the author, is my culture a joke to you? Because at some points in the book, the way he shares some things and how little he understands of what he's being told by these people, it just seems like, you know, a Western guy going to a third world country, which Russia isn't, but still it's kind of like this typical stereotype in America of Russia, that it's, you know, like underdeveloped and people there are fucking stupid or something. And he's just gonna go there and, you know, like learn stuff. And, you know, there's a lot of stereotypes there that I felt were a bit yucky at times. What I also didn't like were regular remarks about women that felt sexist. Especially talking about pretty thin blondes and especially being kind of creepy around Irina, his translator, which I don't know if I want to go in depth about that, but that whole thing in itself, I feel like he should have cut off some of the things that he shared here because it just makes him seem like a pervert and a creep. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about this. But to the point, to talk about the actual information, I will try and go kind of chapter by chapter so that you get an idea and I don't miss anything, because it's important for me to try and include as much as I can. So chapter 1 is meetings, and this is basically him arriving in St. Petersburg in Russia and kind of meeting up with the person who was kind of renting out a room to him, as far as I understand, and kind of setting up dates with the people that were actually supposed to teach him stuff about Slavic magic. So meetings is very much like an introduction into an adventure type of a chapter, right? Then in chapter 2, he talks about the cosmos, and that's immediately where things kind of begin to not work for me personally. So he does mention kind of a variety of influences. He talks about Siberian shamans. He talks about the Fraser's Golden Bow, Eliade, and like various Slavic peoples, the Western Slavs, Eastern Slavs, and Southern Slavs, then comparing that to like the Celtic culture and other Western cultures. So it's kind of a syncretic mixture, you could say. But let's get to the actual, because he shares something like this. This is basically an illustration, and he shares a few of these, so I will show different ones in a moment. He tries to explain how the cosmos is built according to the Slavic mythology. So we know that we have the upper world, the middle world, and the underworld. That is actually correct, but then he tries to kind of insert other systems on top of it, especially when it comes to like cycles of life, comparing them to moon cycles, etc. And while it is true that the Slavs did, and we still do, kind of understand the natural cycles as being reflective of our own individual life cycles and vice versa, the way he portrays it here is incorrect, and it might not be like as deeply incorrect as it could be, but there are some mistakes here, especially when he talks about comparing the seasons to the life cycles of the humans. So spring being birth, summer being youth, autumn being maturity, and old age being winter. And then kind of not understanding that that's the way he portrays it here. The way he portrays it here is basically the solar cross as well. As for the cycles of life, it's incorrect to assign it the way he did. And this is, we know this because us Slavs, we follow, we kind of understand our cycles as compared to the moon cycles. And for us, specifically, this is very specific and there's no way to interpret this in different ways, alternative ways, is that the new moon is youth or being a child, then the full moon is the fullness of who you are, the adulthood, the prime. Then the waning moon is old age, and finally the dark moon, where it's not present in the sky, is death, is where we are already dead, we are not here, right? So it's very specific and you can't interpret this otherwise. So I think he tried to pull this information or like extrapolate this information from other cultures onto our own and did it incorrectly. So the first chapter does this already, and then he kind of inserts this onto you know, the world tree, which I talked about previously, with the upper world, the middle world, and the underworld. So that's chapter 1. Sorry, chapter 2, because chapter 1 was his kind of introduction into the adventure. Then we have chapter 3, the gods. Where do I begin? I will not try and dissect, because if I showed you this book, it's marked all over. Yeah, there's a lot. My summary of the chapter about the gods is that he seems to not have had access to sources, proper sources about this, and maybe didn't care to actually access them, because his knowledge is very scarce and kind of not correct. He jumps between pantheons and compares to other pantheons. He also identifies Horse as a solar god, which we know today is most likely incorrect, and Horse is most likely a lunar god. And also, when talking about rodzanice, who are the kind of lesser deities, you could say, of fate in the Slavic pantheon, he somehow translates their name as the mothers, which is also incorrect, and that's not kind of the point of who they are. He also assumes that Rod isn't an actual deity, but kind of a representation of, in Polish this is ród, so the extended family bloodline, the ancestors, etc. And also says that it's not only the family bloodline, but it's also like the collective as a whole, which is also not entirely true. So that's that. Maybe I should just keep it there with the deities. Okay, now chapter 4 is light and darkness, and here's where I feel like he inserts the most of his own ideas on top of what he's being told, and drawing incorrect conclusions and then repeating them throughout the rest of the book. So basically, Light and Darkness is a chapter about the importance of spectrums and extremes and polarities, dualism basically, within the Slavic culture, Slavic mythology, and thus Slavic magic. Except he's told about the importance of water of life, water of death, darkness, light, the upper world, the underworld, etc. But then he adds other polarities that are outside of our culture on top of it. For example, the yin and yang polarity, which is from Asia, and it's not present in our culture, but somehow he inserts that here and keeps repeating it throughout the rest of the book, which is honestly annoying. and also the kind of masculine-feminine polarity, as well as solar-lunar, which he does incorrectly. Because as I mentioned with the god Horse, for example, he thinks that Horse is a solar deity, which is in fact incorrect. In general, in Slavic mythology, as with other mythologies that have Proto-Indo-European roots, the moon is not a goddess, as is like broadly accepted today in kind of Celtic / Wiccan influenced circles. The moon is a guy, okay? The moon is masculine. The sun is the goddess, actually. This, of course, kind of changed throughout the ages as kind of socio-political changes occurred in Slavic societies, but this is too complex to talk about that right now. So of course the pantheons evolved over the ages, that's normal, and that occurs in every culture. But primarily the sun is kind of considered to be a goddess and the moon a god, which he assigns the other way around. And also when it comes to like the polarity of water and fire, which are crucial to a lot of Slavic magic and a lot of Slavic rituals, which is kind of especially expressed in the rituals of the summer solstice. He assigns feminine polarities to water and masculine polarities to fire, which is also kind of very much simplifying some of the concepts that exist in our culture and thus in our magic, and flattening them and just comparing them to this jumbled kind of syncretic mess that again exists in Wiccan influenced circles, which I don't know what supposed ancient Slavic magic has to do with Wicca. Not much, honestly. So here again, this is his way of presenting it, the masculine, feminine, and then of course correspondences. And this is not really the way that this works in our culture. This is something that's universally accepted in Western occultism these days, not in Slavic culture. So that's that chapter. And then we move on to the first chapter, Earth Magic, the Green Hills. And as I mentioned earlier, there are a few chapters that feature this guy, Vladimir. And for me personally, these were the only chapters that had any meat to them, that there was actually something to pull out of that, if that makes sense. So Vladimir is this guy who was taking Kenneth on trips to forest, or more like big parks on the outskirts of St. Petersburg, in order to teach him some I would say philosophies, approaches, ways to perceive reality that Kenneth interpreted as being rooted in ancient Slavic roots. I'm not sure that's the case. And also it's impossible to kind of discern how much of what is said comes from Kenneth and his interpretation of what Vladimir said, and how much of it actually comes from Vladimir in, you know, a clear way, undisturbed by the author's interpretation of it, if that makes sense. Because I feel like even in some dialogues I didn't really mark them, which I regret now. Like Kenneth asks him some questions and obviously like misunderstanding what the guy said, and the guy says like, no, that's not how it works, or that's not relevant at all, but then he keeps repeating that same thing across the rest of the book as if it wasn't disproved. So basically Vladimir teaches him about I would say an energetic model of perceiving reality, of being able to kind of sense energies around you, tap into places of power, kind of be able to identify where in nature you can find places of power, how to connect and communicate with trees, etc. So that's kind of his main thing. And Vladimir also across the chapters kind of talks about his own relationship with those places and the spirits that reside there, etc. So that's kind of interesting, but you also need to already come at those chapters with some prior knowledge about animism, about Slavic magic, Slavic mythology, and in general kind of knowing your shit when it comes to witchcraft. Then you are able to kind of pull at the strings of knowledge that's actually useful and sift away the rest that's useless, because I feel like it's very much a process of discernment and being able to kind of fish out the good parts. So I did enjoy Vladimir. He seemed like a genuine guy, but also I don't know how much I can trust the author to be relaying the events as they actually happened versus how much of it is fiction or his experiences kind of colorized to seem more interesting kind of later on, because he himself mentions at some point in the book that, you know, he many times he like was using or was taking part in people doing like energy healing on him or like any energy work in general. And he never felt anything at all, but he always tells the people that do it for him that yes, it feels amazing, or yes, it worked, or, you know, basically lying to people, giving them good feedback where in fact he was totally kind of deaf to it. He admits this, and then he proceeds to describe situations where they are basically the kind of situations where he would do this, and describes them as being able to feel something or see something, you know? So I'm wondering how much of it is just, yeah, I'm gonna write that I felt something or saw something just so it's kind of cool in the book, because how would it look like if Vladimir told me to feel into this tree, but I couldn't really feel shit, right? So you kind of have to go along, right? You know what I mean? Now, in this chapter, he also talks a bit about the sauna, and how, maybe I'm just going to quote this, okay? In short, the bathhouse was a pagan temple, and in fact, it was called the Temple of the Mothers, the three fates who represented the female ancestors of the clan. Its association with witchcraft reminds us that the bathhouse was often the setting for esoteric rites of sorcery. A sorcerer might heat himself up in the bathhouse, then dive into ice-cold water, and through his own shamanic inner heat warm the water and change its polarity. The bathhouse, like the circle of trees in which I pondered at Zelenogorsk, was a sacred enclosure, a place well suited for divination. Though images of the bare backsides of peasant girls may produce their own set of associations, it is important to remember that this village mode of divination may essentially be defined as follows. Pose a question, enter the sacred enclosure, and wait patiently for a physical sensation, whether pleasant or unpleasant. I will ignore the remark about the bare backsides of peasant girls and the associations that they supposedly produce for the author. But there's no source quoted here whatsoever of where he takes this information from, that the bathhouse was a place of witchcraft and what the sorcerer did in the bathhouse. This is just factually incorrect, and this is taking facts of the kind of culture around bathhouses and saunas amongst the Slavic people and colorizing them again to kind of match his narrative about witchcraft and sorcery. This is what everybody did, not just sorcerers, right? Okay, this is not okay. Okay, then the next chapter, chapter 6, is magical healing. In this chapter, he introduces Dr. Polyavich at St. Petersburg, who was somebody at Technical University Association of Applied parapsychology. And he meets the guy and kind of introduces him, and then over the chapters also is introduced into Polyavich's supposed historically accurate ways of magical healing and magical massages, magical removal of illnesses, etc. At this point in the book, the vocabulary that is used is mostly New Age vocabulary. There's no Slavic ties to anything that's presented pretty much. I don't know if Dr. Polyavich was... he basically seems like a New Age practitioner, a guy who believes in weird things and is kind of creepy and is potentially having some like legal issues, etc. So all of those chapters are really strange. And when you read the description of the book that I read to you at the very, very beginning of this video about Kenneth learning from the authentic elders of, you know, the Slavic community or whatever, and then presents guys like this, that's an insult to our elders, honestly. That's all I'm going to say. I'm just going to ignore Dr. Polyavich until later on. Then chapter 7 is again the magic of trees, which again is with Vladimir, so there's some interesting bits to that. I already mentioned most of them. He incorrectly describes Amanita muscaria as being a white mushroom with red dots, which is hilarious, and kind of intertwines some kind of folk charms and folk practices in between there, but none of them are actually taught by Vladimir. These are sourced from another book. And let me see, because he mentions this book so many times, Slavonic Mythology by Aleksinsky. So most of those come from this book. Okay, then the next chapter, chapter 8, is a chapter about nature spirits. And in this chapter, he talks about the domovoi, and then kind of goes from the household outside, kind of further and further away from the household. So starting with domovoi and what they are and how to make friends with them, moving on to the yard spirits, and then to the field spirits, to the forest spirits, and to even kind of further more strange spirits of the waters as well. The information about these spirits is only partially correct. Some of it feels like, again, it's kind of colorized to be more appealing or more interesting. I don't even know how to describe this, but I just wish he would stick to his sources and actually quote his sources, because it's interesting throughout this entire chapter where he talks about spirits, and you can tell that he's quoting some type of sources, because he says that in Slovenia this and this, in Russia this and that, in Western Slavic countries like Poland, blah blah blah, this and that. So he must have taken this information from somewhere, not his own head or not these people that he talked to, because he doesn't mention them, but no sources are quoted whatsoever. So we don't know where this information is taken from, and thus it's unreliable. You don't know how much of it is correct, how much of it is sourced well. There is no rigor whatsoever in this book when it comes to sources, sadly. And at the very end, he talks about Baba Yaga, where of course, and Leshe, where of course he says that they are deities, which they are not, and comparing Baba Yaga to the goddess Kali, and you know, it just gets cringy at some point. So I will just skip the description of that. Chapter 9 is again Earth Magic, Winter Song, and this is his adventure with, again, Vladimir, this time during winter at the very end of his stay in Russia, where they go out into the woods and there's very, very deep snow, so they barely get to do anything. But he supposedly hears some spirits, or at least says he does. So that's interesting. Then there's chapter 10, and in my opinion, this chapter should have been removed from the book, because if you read it and if you actually read it, this is sexual assault on the translator Irina, who kind of, you know, was around Kenneth to help him translate because he knew no Russian. They go to this Dr. Polyavich, and this Dr. Polyavich supposedly does some creepy charms of dark magic on both Irina and Kenneth, so that Irina is pressured to take off her dress and Kenneth is forced to take pictures as Irina lays on a table, and Dr. Polyavich does some spiritual massage on her, because he insists that Kenneth must see this before he leaves back to USA. And Kenneth is taking pictures, right? And he's describing how this is disgusting, and he opposes all of this, but this is stronger than him and he can't do anything about this. I really wish readers weren't exposed to shit like this. This is not okay to include in a book, and honestly, based on reading the rest of the book, the previous chapters, you don't know how much of it is made up and basically him trying to justify being creepy towards this woman throughout the whole book. It's throughout the whole book where he makes remarks about how she's beautiful and how she's a blondie and whatever, very inappropriate and just, you know, very 90s. And then at the end, trying to justify why he's taking pictures of her half naked by supposedly being under a charm of a dark magician, dark Russian magician, right? This villain. This is so not okay, right? This is just... by the time I read this chapter, I was livid, honestly. I was so angry. And then finally, we have the last two or three chapters, which are relatively short. The survival of the old gods. So he kind of talks about some of the deities that supposedly survived under the syncretism of icons in the Orthodox religion, which of course is correct, but the conclusion he draws about those syncretism and who is who basically are only marginally correct when it comes to Perun and Veles, and the rest is just questionable at best. So that's that. Then we have the Healing the World tree, chapter 12. And it's interesting because in this last chapter, he criticizes the Western world, the Western New Age movement, as well as Western psychology in comparison to the Slavic culture, Slavic magic, etc. But all of his premises are based on false assumptions, stereotypes, and incorrect information that he supposedly gathered from some random people who aren't elders trained in ancient ways of Slavic magic, but are just some probably modern practitioners of a syncretic, kind of eclectic practice, slightly new agey, right? So his conclusions, they are kind of okay, like, right, we need to look back to our ancestors, we need to, instead of cutting off from everything, which is the Western way, we should be bonding back together and repairing our bonds and trying to save nature, etc. That's all cute, right? That's kind of the end of the book and how he ends this whole adventure, basically. And that's it. So you're kind of left with this, you know, you are kind of left with this conclusion at the end, which is not incorrect or, you know, not bad in any way, but just reading the previous chapters, it feels meaningless at the end, because he's bashing the very things that he's doing throughout the whole book, like bashing, you know, Western psychology, but throughout the whole book he's comparing deities with archetypes and telling you that if you prefer to do your magic in the psychological paradigm, then yeah, sure, whatever, it's the same. And then he says this, like, that makes no sense, dude, like, make up your mind. So anyway, would I recommend this book? Here's a difficult answer. I think this is important to read for people who already know their shit. To read this, to be able to draw some potentially interesting threads among the sea of unreliable information. But if you are new to this, if you are not familiar with our culture, if you don't know much about the mythology, if you don't know much about our folk magic, don't read this as your primary source, because you are going to be misled, and it will take you a long time to kind of trudge back from all that misinformation. Okay, so I do not recommend this for people who are not familiar or are fresh to these topics. If you are kind of a veteran, then sure, go for it. See what you think about it, make up your own mind, form your own opinions. I think it's important to read books, even the ones that we disagree with, because it shapes us, it helps us formulate our own opinions and know ourselves better and know what we actually are about better. I feel like a lot of information in this book would be much more valuable if it was explained by a Slavic person who understands these concepts, because Kenneth doesn't understand Russian. He talks to people whose English is either kind of weak or non-existent at all and relies on some translations. And he's not sure if these people explain these things to him in the way they would talk about it between each other, or in a simplified language, or using language that they use because he's American and they are trying to explain things in a way that they think he would better understand. So none of this ends up being authentic. Like he talks about concepts of yin and yang, of karma, of yoga, prana, you know, like fucking everything from all cultures, and slapping those concepts on top of our Slavic concepts present in our magic and on our pantheons, our mythology, our kind of cultural beliefs, etc. Because he doesn't know better, doesn't understand our culture, and has no way of gaining a better understanding. You know, like going to Russia with zero background and not knowing the language is probably just not a good idea to gain actual knowledge, unless you are a researcher, like a folklorist or an ethnographer or somebody like an anthropologist, right? And not just a random guy who goes with zero background and zero language and tries to gain some kind of revelations that then he can sell them to people. It's just, you know, just not the best in that way. Okay, so that would be it. That's my review of Flight of the Firebird. If you had the opportunity to read this book, I would love to hear your opinions about it, what you think. I'm sorry that this was harsh, but honestly, I felt like I just couldn't be silent about this. I always try to give you my authentic opinions, and you can tell that the fact that I got these books for review did not sway my opinion. There was just too much, you know, to kind of brush it off, I suppose. So yeah, again, thank you so much for watching. I would be curious to hear your opinions, and see you around. Bye.